Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with the masks of science. Physics or metaphysics. If there is anything on Earth like progress, science will someday have to give up nolens volens. Such monstrous ideas as her physical self-guiding laws, void of soul and spirit, and then turn to the occult teachings. It has done so already. However altered are the title page and revised editions of the Scientific Catechism. It is now over half a century since, in comparing modern with ancient thought, it has been found that, however different our philosophy may appear from that of our ancestors, it is, nevertheless, composed only of additions and subtractions taken from the old philosophy and transmitted drop by drop through the filter of antecedents. This fact was well known to Faraday and other eminent men of science. Atoms, ether, evolution itself, all comes to modern science from ancient notions. All is based on the conceptions of the archaic nations. Conceptions, for the profane, under the shape of allegories. Plain truths taught during the initiations to the elect, which truths have not been partially divulged through Greek writers and have descended to us. This does not mean that occultism has ever had the same views on matter, atoms, and ether as found in the esotericism of the classical Greek writers. Yet, if we believe Mr. Tyndall, even Faraday was an Aristotelian and an agnostic more than a materialist. In his Faraday as a Discoverer, the author shows the great physicist using old reflections of Aristotle, which are concisely found in some of his works. Faraday, Boscovich, and all others, however, who see in the atoms and molecules centers of force, and in the corresponding element force an entity by itself, are far nearer the truth, perchance, than those who, denouncing them, denounce at the same time the old corpuscular Pythagorean theory. One, by the way, which has never passed to posterity as the great philosopher really taught it, on the ground of its delusion that the conceptual elements of matter can be grasped as separate and real entities. They can. It is on the atomic level. Right, the corpuscular theory is a bunch of separation, right, individualized pieces of matter, and that is literally what it is, right? Now, whether or not that exactly aligns, I haven't done a deep dive on the corpuscular theory. We haven't got to that, right? We're getting to those type of things in these studies, but we haven't got to that. But the elementals, the elements, the individualized elements on the first plane of existence, the hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, all of those things that are free floating around you are indeed separate entities, right? Now, whether that is navigated by some creature of the sixth or seventh dimension attached to every helium and oxygen is going to be a matter of high debate, but the fact that there are individual elements is not, right? That and so some of this, the others who see in the atoms and molecules centers of force, there they are. They're literally little magnets. Every single one of them is held in place by magnetics and generate their own magnetics. Right? The nucleus is surrounded by the electron, and the electron is rotating around the nucleus by magnetics. Right? It's not gravity holding it in its place. It is magnetics holding it in its place. And so each one of those little pieces whether they have joined into larger pieces or not, do indeed have their own centers of force. The chief and most fatal mistake and fallacy made by science, in the view of the occultist, lies in the idea of the possibility of such a thing as inorganic or dead matter in nature. Is anything dead or inorganic capable of transformation or change? Occultism asks. And is there anything under the sun which remains immutable or changeless? Now, I do hold that there is a certain amount of volition, right? The first dimension of existence, which is merely existing, would be where the atoms are. And they do their own thing, right? There's several of them free floating around me right now. Sometimes they make ionic bonds and become larger. Sometimes they separate and become smaller. So whether or not it's organic has more to do with whether it can decompose, right? If it is carbon-based with the capacity for decomposition, and quite literally, you can decompose even crystals, right? You can take them back to their individualized elemental stage. Right now, that is not a natural decomposition, and we tend to think more about organics as things that, like plants, animals, that grow in the sense that we think about the growth, right? The maturation over time of the individualized entity. Like a piece of quartz, for example, can grow larger, but it's not really growing in the way that we think of organic things growing. But you can decompose quartz, right? You can isolate it down to its individualized things, but it's not a natural occurrence, right? That's more of a definition between organic and inorganic than thinking, right? You don't have to think to be organic, right? Plants, we don't know that they think. There is good reason to suppose it, right? Talking about mycelium networks and things along that network, or along that way. Definitely lend towards there being at least a little bit of intelligence in the second plane of existence. It is entirely possible that there is in the first plane of existence, but it is something that we'll never be able to prove, and so arguing about it is kind of dumb. Is there anything under the sun which remains immutable or changeless? No. That doesn't mean that it's immediate, right? I have this stone right here. This stone right here, I don't know how long it's been around, but it's been in my possession for 5 years, pretty much unchanged. But prior to my possession, it may have been a larger rock. Tomorrow, it may be a smaller rock. That is change, right? Erosion happening from rain on a mountain, that's change. So nothing remains immutable or changeless in the physical plane. This fallacy is nowhere better illustrated than in the scientific work of a German savant, Professor Philipp Spiller, De Welthaar als Kosmische Kraft. In this cosmological treatise, the author attempts to prove that no material constituent of a body, no atom, is in itself originally endowed with force, but that every such atom is absolutely dead and without any power to act at a distance. That is patently untrue. Footnote. Something dead implies that it had been, at some time, living. When? At what period of cosmogony? Occultism says that in all cases when matter appears inert, it is the most active. A wooden or a stone block is motionless and impenetrable to all intents and purposes. Nevertheless, and de facto, its particles are in ceaseless, eternal vibration, which is so rapid that to the physical eye, the body seems absolutely devoid of motion. Actually, it's so slow that it appears to be devoid of motion. Continuation of the footnote. And this spatial distance between those particles and their vibratory motion is considered from another plane of being and perception as great as that which separates snowflakes or drops of rain. But to physical science, this will be an absurdity. Well, yeah. We now know, once again, looking back through the history, right, that we have advances in science since 1888, and one of those is the electron magnoscope. Magnoscope is not the right word. Microscope. Electron microscope. We can see on the level of electrons. And we now know that every atom is not absolutely dead at all. It contains its own rotating, not vibrating, its own rotation. Every single one of them, from helium all the way up to whatever the last one is, I don't even know. Every single one of them has a nucleus, and every single one of them is surrounded by electrons, and those electrons are moving, and so is the nucleus in every single one. Now, solidity is a relative term, right? You appear to be solid, unless somebody jabs you with something really sharp, and then you're quite fluid. It is the same for this phone, right? It appears to be quite solid. It's not, however. It is indeed. Every single atom inside of this phone is indeed moving. It is held in this shape by magnetics. We are able to affect that through heat and electricity. We can change the composition of this into something else. But you never actually touch anything. We haven't hit on that for a little while. You think that you're holding your phone, right? You have it in your hand. You're like, you know what? I'm touching this thing. You're not. You are held apart from your phone by very, very minuscule gaps. It is the electromagnetism of this phone and the electromagnetism of your hand acting against each other because you are separate entities. The resistance is less when you stick your hand in water. But both of those are composed of the same elements in different proportions and electromagnetic stasis. And so you don't actually ever pick anything up, right? I don't care how hard you try, there is a barrier between you and this. It sounds like you're touching it. You're not. What you're hearing is the reverberation of that electromagnetic distance being held. That can be a difficult concept to wrap your mind around. It is much like the concept of this phone case is not blue. This phone case contains every single color except blue, and that's why you see blue. What you see is the color that is not absorbed by the phone case. Every other color that is coming from around me through these lights is being absorbed into the phone, and the only one that is being reflected is the one that it doesn't have. It's like algebra. Cancellation of factors, right? If you have a 2 on this side of the equation and you have a 2 on this side of the equation, they cancel each other out, right? The A and the B, or however you want to conceptualize it. It's the same here, right? Every other color is being absorbed except the one that is not present, and that is being reflected. It's a difficult concept to wrap your mind around, but once you wrap your mind around that, all the rest of them get a little bit easier to wrap your mind around. All right, back to the text. This statement, however, does not prevent Spiller from enunciating an occult doctrine and principle. He asserts the independent substantiality of force and shows it as an incorporeal stuff or substance. Now, substance is not matter in metaphysics, and for argument's sake, it may be granted that it is a wrong expression to use. But this is due to the poverty of European languages, and especially to that of scientific terms. Then this stuff is identified and connected by Spiller with the ether, or plasma. Expressed in occult language, it might be said with more correctness that this force substance is an ever-active, phenomenal, positive ether, prakriti, while the omnipresent, all-pervading ether is the noumena of the former, the substratum of all, or akasa. Nevertheless, Stallo falls foul of Spiller as he does of the materialist. He is accused of utter disregard of the fundamental correlation of force and matter, of neither of which science knows anything certain. For this hypostasized half-concept is, in the view of all the other physicists, not only imponderable, but destitute of cohesive chemical, thermal, electrical, and magnetic forces, all of which forces, according to occultism, ether is the source and cause. For me, every time you see the word ether, it is going to be plasma. We have discussed that several times. Therefore, Spiller, with all his mistakes, exhibits more intuition than any other modern scientist, with the exception of Dr. Richardson, perhaps, the theorist on the nerve force, or nervous ether, also on sun force and earth force. Footnote. See Popular Science Review, Volume 5. For ether, in esotericism, is the very quintessence of all possible energy, and it is certainly to this universal agent, composed of many agents, that all the manifestations of energy in the material, psychic, and spiritual worlds are due. We have discussed many times the plasma. Plasma is quite literally the net that is everything. It is every single atom in existence. Now, there are two states of a plasmic exchange, right? There is the inactive, and then there is the active. The inactive is around you all of the time. You will walk through it, you breathe it, you talk through it, you move through it every single day. It is every single atom, and you walk through them. But you can witness the change happen. Whenever a bolt of lightning builds up the static charge and it discharges, that is the active element of plasma. It is the potentiality that is held in stasis around us at all times, being enacted into movement. The movement that we see is the light, but what is actually happening is the ionic bonds are changing all the way from the ground to the sky. Every single place that you see that light emit, that is because there is an ionic change happening. One of the most common is that water in the form of vapor is separated. It is no longer H2O, but it is two H's and an O. Those separate, and at the same time, the change is made to O3 from O1. There is another chemical bond that happens pretty much simultaneously with the breaking apart, which creates ozone. This is a process that is pretty firmly well established. Everybody knows it. This is not something controversial to talk about. The controversial part is the plasma, right? When you see the lightning bolt, that is plasma being activated in that narrow little scope. But that same potentiality exists around you right now. You can be shocked. There can be a lightning bolt come from the sky and hit you. That is the potentiality turning into kinetic. And what we see when that happens is the process of those ionic bonds changing. It is the exact same thing that happens when I strike this lighter and it goes from butane into the carbon monoxide and several other things that it becomes. To me, that is the plasma. It is literally every single bit of matter in existence anywhere. So all of it is connected. Like we are connected to the sun by plasma. We are connected to Alpha Centauri by plasma. We are connected to each other by plasma. When I breathe out, somebody that's right there feels that breath. That is the plasma in motion with no ionic changes. When you move through the plasma, you are creating friction. Right? There are so many scientific principles that can be explained by this and is simply ignored because it's too close to ether. So, back to the text. What are electricity and light? In fact, plasma, the activated form of it. How can science know that one is a fluid and the other a mode of motion? They are both modes of motion. Why is it not made clear why a difference should be made between them? There shouldn't, since both are considered force correlations. Electricity is a fluid, we are told, immaterial and non-molecular. That is definitely a misunderstanding, one that I am not sure that we have solved yet, though Helmholtz thinks otherwise. And the proof of it is that we can bottle it up, accumulate and store it away. Then it must be simply matter and no peculiar fluid. Nor is it only a mode of motion, for motion could hardly be stored in a Leyden jar. As for light, it is a still more extraordinary mode of motion, since, marvelous as it may appear, light, also, can actually be stored up for use, as demonstrated by Professor Grove nearly half a century ago. I would be very interested to see that. I will almost certainly forget to look it up, though, so if you can remind me to look up Professor Grove, I would like to see that. Light being stored for later use. I have a problem with that. I don't think that that is a real thing. So, take an engraving which has been kept for some days in the dark and expose it to full sunshine. That is, insulate it for 15 minutes, lay it on sensitive paper in a dark place, and at the end of 24 hours, it will have left an impression of itself on the sensitive paper, the whites coming out as blacks. There seemed to be no limit for the reproduction of engravings. What is it that remains fixed, nailed, so to say, on the paper? It is a force, certainly, that fixed the thing, but what is that thing? The residue of which remains on the paper. The electromagnetic bonding forces of creation. It is quite literally the electromagnetic energy that is created, being recorded because it is sensitive paper. It is sensitive to what? Electromagnetic manipulation. Expose it to sunlight by itself, it will not do the same thing. It will ruin it, right? You have to be in a dark room in order to develop film. That is because the light will affect it. And so light being the activated portion of the plasma, right? Even the light you see is moving through the plasma in a wave. It is guiding itself around the individualized atoms. And so the wave of these particles moving in a wave is a kinetic force of motion. It is energy released. Energy released is kineticism. Kineticism is movement. All of that is the exact same thing. Electricity is movement of potentiality, right? Do I have a full understanding of that? Not necessarily, but it does stand up. So, our learned men will get out of this through some scientific technicality. But what is it that is intercepted? No, so as to imprison a certain quantity of it on glass, paper, or wood. Is it motion or is it force? That is the same. Just the same as motion is light, right? Light is an expression of motion. If you were moving at the speed of light, you would be light, right? It is matter expended in motion to the utmost degree. That's what light is. What starts that? Force, right? The release of potentiality into kineticism literally is force. And without force and movement, there is no light. So it is literally codependent upon each other to the point of where it is inextricable. There is no differentiation between motion and force. Without the one, there is none, right? Without the other one, there is no other one, right? If you don't apply force, there is no motion. If there is no motion, it doesn't matter how much force you apply. Or, shall we be told that what remains behind is the effect only of the force or motion? Then what is this force? Magnetism. Force or energy is a quality, but every quality must belong to a something or a somebody. In physics, force is defined as that which changes or tends to change any physical relation between bodies, whether mechanical, thermal, chemical, electrical, magnetic. Every single one of those is enacted by plasma. But it is not that force or that motion which remains behind on the paper when the force or motion has ceased to act, and yet something which our physical senses cannot perceive has been left there to become a cause in its turn and produce effects. What is it? Is it not matter as defined by science? It is not matter as defined by science. An example, matter in any of its known states. You're right, it took them about 100 years to figure that one out. An alchemist would say it was a spiritual secretion and would be laughed at. But yet, when the physicists said that electricity stored up was a fluid, or that light fixed on paper is still sunlight, this is science. Footnote. The newest authorities have rejected these explanations as exploded theories and have now deified motion as their sole idol. But surely they and their idol will one day share the fate of their predecessors. In the opinion of an experienced occultist, one who has verified the whole series of nidanas, of causes and effects that finally project their last effect onto this R plane of manifestations, one who has traced matter back to its noumenon, the explanation of the physicist is like calling anger, or its effects, the exclamation provoked by it, a secretion or a fluid, and man, the cause of it, its material conductor. But, as Grove prophetically remarked, that day is fast approaching when it will be confessed that the forces we know of are but the phenomenal manifestations of realities we know nothing about, but which were known to the ancients and by them worshipped. He made, and here's the thing, anger is indeed the reaction that you have. You can feel anger, but unless you act upon anger, it's really nothing, right? And so, to explain anger as the exclamation provoked by it, that's kind of not wrong. And to say that the man, the cause of it, is its material conductor, that's not wrong either. All right. In order to talk about that, we have to hit the Trinity, which we haven't done today, but there are three keys, right? The Trinity is this: the body, which is the temple by which you navigate 5D space. You have the spirit, which is the plasma that we were just talking about, and then you have the soul, which is the individualized piece of divinity, which is you. It is the part that makes the decisions for the temple, but it's not the part that enacts those. The part that enacts those is actually the Holy Spirit, because it takes electricity. Electricity is an integral part of plasma, right? It is the change enacted. It is turning the now into the next. And so what happens? You, the individualized piece of divinity that resides in this body, makes a decision for the body. I'm going to wiggle my fingers. But you don't actually make your fingers wiggle. What happens is you make the decision, your brain takes that decision and interprets it, and then sends out a signal in the form of electricity through your nervous system to your fingers, and that makes it move. It's not you that's actually making it move. It is the plasma. It is the Holy Spirit. It is the ether making it move. It's turning the potentiality into kineticism. That is how that works. And so, when you get angry, it's a decision you make. You make the decision to get angry and express that. But the anger is not tied to your body. It's not tied to the spirit. The anger is tied to your soul. So the body is merely a conduit, just as much as the plasma is merely a conduit. So you have to take offense. Nobody can give it to you. There is no word that you can say that is worthy of violence. I don't care who you say it to, right? Now, assault is a different thing. We just had this conversation in one of the posts that I made on the community page. You have to take offense. Nobody can give it to you. You have to decide that this thing is true enough about me that I'm going to get mad about it. And so you make a decision. Whether or not you realize it is a decision, every time that you express wrath, that is a decision that you're making. It is something that has no requirement upon you. You are choosing to be mad. And so the choosing allows your body to become the conduit for it. So, yeah, that's true. He made one still more suggestive remark, however, which ought to have become the motto of science, but has not. Sir W. Grove said that science should have neither desires nor prejudices. Truth should be her sole aim. Meanwhile, in our days, scientists are more self-opinionated and bigoted than even the clergy, for they minister to, if they do not actually worship, false matter, which is their unknown God. and how unknown it is may be inferred from the many confessions of the most eminent physicists and biologists, with Faraday at their head. Not only, he said, could he never presume to pronounce whether force was a property or a function of matter, but he actually did not know what was meant by the word matter. There was a time, he added, when he believed he knew something of matter, but the more he lived and the more carefully he studied it, the more he became convinced of his utter ignorance on the nature of matter. Footnote. This ominous confession was made, we believe, at a scientific congress at Swansea. Faraday held a similar opinion, however, as stated by Tyndall. What do we know of the atom apart from its force? You imagine a nucleus which may be called A, and surrounded by forces which may be called M. To my mind, the A, or the nucleus, vanishes, and the substance consists of the powers M. And indeed, what notion can we form of the nucleus independent of its powers? What thought remains on which to hang the imagination of an A independent of the acknowledged forces? And once again, this is something that we have the benefit of looking back through history at. In 1888, they did not have the electron microscope, and we do now, so we can see the nucleus. It doesn't vanish, right? Now, you can say that the atom works as a whole unit, or you can say that it works as separate, right? The proton, the neutron, and the electron. Those are separate powers acting in concert, right? So you can say what they're trying to say here, right? That either it's A and M, or it's A or M. Now, it is A and M. That is what it is really going to break down to. Each one of the individual constituent parts is acting in concert and unison with each other. You are made up of all of the different elements. Every single one of them is contained within you, but you are not the element yourself. You are a unit. Same thing. All right, back to the text. The occultists are often misunderstood because, for lack of better terms, they apply to the essence of force under certain aspects the descriptive epithet of substance. Now, the names for the varieties of substance on different planes of perception and being are legion. Eastern occultism has a special appellation for each kind, but science, like England, in the recollection of a witty Frenchman, blessed with 36 religions and only one fish sauce, has but one name for all, namely substance. Moreover, neither the orthodox physicists nor their critics seem to be very certain of their premises, and are as apt to confuse the effects as they do the causes. It is incorrect, for instance, to say, as Stallo does, that matter can no more be realized or conceived as mere spatial presence than as a concretion of forces, or that force is nothing without mass, and mass is nothing without force. For one is the noumenon, and the other the phenomenon. Again, Schelling, when saying that it is a mere delusion of the fantasy that something, we know not what, remains after we have denuded an object of all the predicates belonging to it. Footnote. Schelling, I.D., could never have applied the remark to the realm of transcendental metaphysics. It is true that pure force is nothing in the world of physics. It is all in the domain of spirit. Says Stallo, if we reduce the mass upon which a given force, however small, acts to limit zero, or mathematically expressed, until it becomes infinitely small, the consequence is that the velocity of the resulting motion is infinitely great, and that the thing is, at any given moment, neither here nor there, but everywhere, that there is no real presence. It is impossible, therefore, to construct matter by a synthesis of forces. The speculations they had. This may be true in the phenomenal world, inasmuch as the elusive reflection of the one reality of the supersensual world may appear true to the dwarfed conceptions of a materialist. It is absolutely incorrect when the argument is applied to things in what the Kabbalists call the supermundane spheres. Inertia, so-called, is force, according to Newton, and for the students of the esoteric sciences, the greatest of the occult forces. A body may be considered divorced from its relations with other bodies, which, according to physical and mechanical sciences, give rise to its attributes, only conceptually, only on this plane of illusion. In fact, it can never be so detached, death itself being unable to detach it from its relation with the universal forces, of which the one force, or life, is the synthesis, but simply continues such interrelation on another plane. But what if Stallo is right, can Dr. James Kroll mean when in speaking on the transformation of gravity? He brings forward the views advocated by Faraday, Watterson, and others, for he says very plainly that gravity is a force pervading space external to bodies, and that on the mutual approach of the bodies the force is not increased, as is generally supposed, but the bodies merely pass into a place where the force exists with greater intensity. No one will deny that a force, whether gravity, electricity, or any other force, which exists outside of the bodies and in open space, be it in ether or vacuum, must be something and not a pure nothing, when conceived apart from a mass. Otherwise, it could hardly exist in one place with a greater and in another with reduced intensity. G.A. Hearn declares the same in his Théorie mécanique de l'univers. He tries to demonstrate that the atom of the chemist is not an entity of pure convention, or simply an explicative device, but that it exists, really, and that its volume is unalterable, and that consequently is not elastic. Force, therefore, is not in the atom, it is in the space which separates the atoms from each other. That is not entirely untrue, right? Magnetism is the fundamental key which holds the atom in place. It holds the nucleus, the proton, and the neutron. It holds them together. It also separates the electron from them and creates the rotation around it. We talked about that in the last video. And so this is not entirely untrue. It does not necessarily reside in the atom, but it is a force that the atom contains. And also, spirit is every single piece of the atom as well as the atom, right? It is every atom in existence is the Holy Spirit or plasma or ether, whichever you're comfortable with using. And it is all the space between the atoms and inside of the atoms. So it is the nucleus and it is the electrons, but it is the space between the electron and the nucleus, and it is the space between the individualized atoms. No matter how densely compact they may seem to be, there is indeed space between them, and that space is quite literally the same fabric as the nucleus. All right. The above cited views, expressed by two men of science of great eminence in their respective countries, show that it is not in the least unscientific to speak of the substantiality of these so-called forces. Subject to some future specific name, this force is substance of some kind and can be nothing else. And perhaps, one day, science will be the first to readopt the derided name of phlogiston. Whatever may be the future name given to it, to maintain that force does not reside in the atoms, but only in space between them, may be scientific enough. Nevertheless, it is not true. To the mind of the occultist, it is like saying that water does not reside in the drops in which the ocean is composed, but only in the space between those drops. That is not an invalid objection. The objection made that there are two distinct schools of physicists, by one of which the force is assumed to be an independent substantial entity, which is not a property of matter, nor is it essentially related to matter. Footnote 1. Concepts of Modern Physics, introductory to the second edition. Essentially related to matter, is hardly likely to help the profane to any clearer understanding. It is, on the contrary, still more calculated to throw the question into greater confusion than ever. For force is, then, neither this nor the other. By viewing it as an independent, substantial entity, the theory extends the right hand of fellowship to occultism, while the strange, contradictory idea that it is not related to matter otherwise than by its power to act upon it. Footnote 2. There is a citation. Power to act upon it leads physical science to the most absurd contradictory hypotheses. Whether force or motion, occultism, seeing no difference between the two, never attempts to separate them. I'm with that. It cannot act for the adherents of the atomo-mechanical theory one way, and for those of the rival schools in another way. Nor can the atoms be, in one case, absolutely uniform in size and weight, and in another, vary in their weight. They vary in their weight. That is why we have the periodic table, right? For, in the words of the same able critic, while the absolute equality of the primordial units of mass is thus an essential part of the foundations of the mechanical theory, the whole modern science of chemistry is based upon a principle directly subversive to it, a principle of which has recently been said that it holds the same place in chemistry that the law of gravitation does in astronomy. Footnote 3. J.P. Cook and the New Chemistry. This principle is known as the law of Avogadro or Ampere. Footnote 4. It imports that equal volumes of all substances, when in the gaseous state and under like conditions of pressure and temperature, contain the same number of molecules. Whence it follows that the weights of the molecules are proportional to the specific gravities of the gases. That, therefore, these being different, the weights of the molecules are different also, they are. And inasmuch as the molecules of certain elementary substances are monatomic, consist of but one atom each, while the molecules of various other substances contain the same number of atoms, that the ultimate atoms of substances are of different weights. Concepts of modern physics. As shown further on in the same volume, this cardinal principle of modern theoretical chemistry is in utter and irreconcilable conflict with the first proposition of the atomo-mechanical theory, namely, the absolute equality of the primordial units of mass. And once again, we have that lens of history to look back through. We know for a fact that hydrogen and helium have different weights. It is the same all the way through the periodic table, and that is things that they were speculating about in the 1880s. This shows that either modern chemistry or modern physics is entirely wrong in its respective fundamental principles. For at the assumption of atoms of different specific gravities on the basis of the atomic theory in physics is deemed absurd, and chemistry meets, nevertheless, on its opposite basis, in the question of the formation and transformation of chemical compounds with unfailing experimental verification. Then it becomes apparent that it is the atomo-mechanical theory which is untenable, the explanations of the latter that the differences of weights are only differences of density, and differences of density are differences of distance between the particles contained in a given space, are not really valid, because before a physicist can argue in his defense that, as in the atom there is no multiplicity of particles and no void space, hence differences of density or weight are impossible in the case of atoms. He must first know what an atom is in reality, and that he cannot know. He must bring it under the observation of at least one of his physical senses, and that he cannot do. Once again, we have that lens of history. For the simple reason that no one has ever seen, smelt, heard, touched, or tasted an atom. The atom belongs wholly to the domain of metaphysics. It is an entified abstraction, at any rate for physical science, and it has naught to do with physics, strictly speaking, as it can never be brought to the test of retort or balance. And that's why we do not make emphatic statements very often, right? That's why I am so so diligent in trying to separate speculation from known things. It is great to speculate. I speculate all of the time. I try to be clear when I'm speculating because I don't want to say something as stupid as this. Right? This is stupid. Looking back through the history of time, it was speculation in the 1880s. So for us, we see things differently because we have a better understanding. I try not to talk emphatically about things that I don't have an understanding of, right? I talk about things that I believe and I try to relay them as speculation for this very reason. She actually believed that atoms had nothing to do with physics, that we would never be able to test them. Now, I say quite often, we will probably never know, right? I say that a lot. That is an entirely different statement than we will never know. It's entirely different. There is a probable added to it, and that makes all of the difference in the world. Be very careful when speaking emphatically about something that you cannot know the outcome of. I say that it is extremely unlikely that we will ever know the reality of God this side of the other side, right? And in the incorporated material world in which we are existing in, we may not ever have a confirmation of God. You can believe in God. I absolutely emphatically do. But that doesn't mean it's true. It means that it is my belief. It means that it is my speculation. It means that it is something that I think about, that I spend an enormous amount of time upon, but it doesn't make it true. And there is no way, as far as I am aware, that it ever will be proven to be true. So I say we will probably not ever prove that. When you say hard and fast, this will never happen, there is nothing God likes more than to turn a never into a now. Back to the text. The mechanical conception, therefore, becomes a jumble of the most conflicting theories and dilemmas. In the minds of the many scientists who disagree on this, as on other subjects, the evolution of which the Eastern occultists who follow this scientific strife beholds in the greatest bewilderment. To conclude on the question of gravity, how can science presume to know anything certain of it? How can it maintain its position and its hypotheses against those of the occultists who see in gravity only sympathy and antipathy, or attraction and repulsion, caused by physical polarity on our terrestrial plane and by spiritual causes outside of its influence? How can they disagree with the occultist before they agree among themselves? Indeed, one hears of the conservation of energy, and in the same breath of the perfect hardness and inelasticity of the atoms, of the kinetic theory of gases being identical with potential energy, so-called, and at the same time of the elementary units of mass being absolutely hard and inelastic. An occultist opens a scientific word and reads as follows: Physical atomism derives all the qualitative properties of matter from the forms of atomic motion. The atoms themselves remain as elements utterly devoid of property. And further, chemistry in its ultimate form must be atomic mechanics. And, a moment after he is told that, gases consist of atoms which behave like solid, perfectly elastic spheres. Finally, to crown all, Sir William Thomson is found declaring that we are forbidden by the modern theory of the conservation of energy to assume inelasticity or anything short of perfect elasticity of the ultimate molecules, whether of ultramundane or mundane matter. But what do the men of true science say to all this? By the men of true science, we mean those who care too much for the truth and too little for their personal vanity to dogmatize on anything, as the majority do. There are several among them, perhaps more than dare publish openly their secret conclusions for fear of the cry of, "Stone him to death!" Men whose intuitions have made them span the abyss that lies between the terrestrial aspect of nature and the, to us, on our plane of illusion, subjective, i.e., transcendentally objective substance, and led them to proclaim the existence of the latter. We are not on a plane of illusion. I fully understand that separates me from most of the people who will be doing a lesson like this. It fully separates me from the other occultists out there, and I am fine with that. There are several things that I do that are not consistent with the things that are taught in these various lessons, and that is why I'm here, is to differentiate, right? We are in a material existence. We are objectively here in this material existence as individualized slices of divinity for experience on a voluntary basis. This is not a prison planet. It is a planet for learning. It is a classroom more than anything. And looking at it as though it is only an illusion and you can just do whatever because it's only an illusion is wrong. Like fundamentally wrong. And that is fully understanding that we just had a whole conversation about subjectivity. Matter, to the occultist, it must be remembered, is that totality of existences in the cosmos, which falls within any of the planes of possible perception. We are but too well aware that orthodox theories of sound, heat, and light are against the occult doctrines. But it is not enough for the men of science, or their defenders, to say that they do not deny dynamic power to light and heat, and urge as a proof of the fact that Mr. Crookes's radiometer has unsettled no views. If they would fathom the ultimate nature of these forces, they have first to admit their substantial nature, however supersensuous. Neither do the occultists deny the correctness of the vibratory theory. Footnote. Referring to the aura, one of the masters says in the occult world, "How could you make yourself understood by command, in fact, those semi-intelligent forces whose means of communication with us are not through spoken words, but through sounds and colors, in correlation between the vibrations of the two. It is this correlation that is unknown to modern science, yet was many times explained by the alchemist. Only they limit its functions to our earth, declaring its inadequacy on other planes than ours, since masters in the occult sciences perceive the causes that produce ethereal vibrations. Were all these only the fictions of the alchemist or dreams of the mystics, men such as Paracelsus, Philaethes, Van Helmont, and so many others would have to be regarded as worse than visionaries. They would become impostors and deliberate mystificators. The occultists are taken to task for calling the cause of light, heat, sound, cohesion, magnetism, etc., etc., a substance. Footnote 2. The substance of the occultist, however, is to the most refined substance of the physicist what radiant matter is to the leather of the chemist's boots. Mr. Clerk Maxwell has stated that the pressure of strong sunlight on a square mile is about 3¼ pounds. It is, they are told, the energy of the myriad ether waves, and when they call it a substance impinging on that area, their explanation is proclaimed unscientific. Light does indeed have weight. There is no justification for such an accusation. In no way, as stated more than once before now, do the occultists dispute the explanations of science as affording a solution of the immediate objective agencies at work. Science only errs in believing that, because it has detected in vibratory waves the proximate cause of these phenomena, it has therefore revealed all that lies beyond the threshold of sense. It merely traces the sequence of phenomena on a plane of effects, illusory projections from the region that occultism has long since penetrated. And the latter maintains that those etheric tremors are not, as asserted by science, set up by the vibrations of the molecules of known bodies. the matter of our terrestrial objective consciousness, but that we must seek for the ultimate causes of light, heat, etc., etc., in matter, existing in supersensuous states. Not untrue. States, however, as fully objective to the spiritual eye of man as a horse or a tree is to the ordinary mortal. Light and heat are the ghost or shadow of matter in motion. That is true. Such states can be perceived by the seer or the adept during the hours of trance under the Sushumna ray, the first of the 7 mystic rays of the sun. Now, I don't know these 7 mysterious rays, but you can indeed perceive this. This is something that takes a great deal of effort. And by effort, I mean discipline more than like physical exertion, right? You have to go out into the sunlight. You have to sit in meditation. Then you have to do the work. But you can indeed do the work. And you can indeed perceive those lights with your eyes closed. That is definitely a thing that can happen, right? You can do it to a lesser degree only because it is less powerful. Like I'm surrounded by lights right here. I got one there, one there, one there, one there, and one up here, right? You can do that in this condition. It's less effective than in sunlight because sunlight is a more powerful force. So also, that's coming in one direction, right? It's coming from the sun in one direction. I understand that it goes everywhere. Whereas these lights are coming from multiple sources, so they will contradict each other. But this is definitely something that you can do. I have done it. That's why I say it in that manner. Now, I know absolutely nothing of these 7 mystic rays of the sun. Like, absolutely nothing. We have done Isis Unveiled. We are at least almost halfway through this particular study, and we have not got to that at all. Thus, we put forward the occult teaching which maintains the reality of a supersubstantial and supersensible essence of that akasa, not ether, which is only an aspect of the latter. That's another place where I disagree. I believe that the akasa is indeed the ether, which is plasma, which is the Holy Spirit. We have dealt with that before. The nature of which cannot be inferred from its remoter manifestations. It is merely phenomenal failings of effects on this terrene plane. Science, on the contrary, informs us that heat can never be regarded as matter in any conceivable state. Heat is matter in motion. Footnote 2. To cite a most impartial critic, on whose authority no one can call into question, as a reminder to the Western dogmatists, that the question cannot be in any way considered as settled. There is no fundamental difference between light and heat. Each is merely a metamorphosis of the other. Heat is light in complete repose. Light is heat in rapid motion. Directly light is combined with a body, it becomes heat. But when it is thrown off from the body, it again becomes light. Leslie's fluid theory of light and heat. Whether this is true or false we cannot tell, and many years, perhaps generations, will elapse before we are able to tell. No, we can tell now. Right? It was a generation. We found this out early in the 1900s. So it was not long after her. That's why I say no. Right? We found this out, though. We have the lens of history once again to look back upon. We are also told that the 2 great obstacles to the fluid theory of heat undoubtedly are 1. The production of heat by friction, excitation of molecular motions, and 2. The conversion of heat into mechanical motion. The answer given is, there are fluids of various kinds. Electricity is called a fluid, and so was heat quite recently, but it was on the supposition that heat was some imponderable substance. This was during the supreme and autocratic reign of matter. When the latter was dethroned and motion was proclaimed as the sole sovereign ruler of the universe, heat became a mode of motion. We need not despair. It may become something else tomorrow. Like the universe itself, science is ever becoming and can never say, I am that I am. On the other hand, occult science has its changeless traditions from prehistoric times. It may err in particulars. It can never become guilty of a mistake in questions of universal laws, simply because that science, justly referred to by philosophy as the divine, was born on higher planes and was brought on earth by beings who are wiser than man will be, even in the seventh race of his seventh round. So even at completion you'll never attain. That's funny. And that science maintains that forces are not what modern learning would have them. E.g., magnetism is not a mode of motion, and, in this particular case, at least, exact modern science is sure to come to grief someday. I'm not sure if she is stating here that they believed then that magnetism was not a mode of motion, but it absolutely is, because it is a fundamental driver of motion in a cosmic sense, right? Every atom is held in place and in motion by electromagnetism. Nothing, at the first blush, can appear more ridiculous, more outrageously absurd than to say, for instance, the Hindu initiated yogi knows really 10 times more than the greatest European physicist of the ultimate nature and constitution of light, both solar and lunar. Yet, why is the Sushumna ray believed to be that ray which furnishes the moon with its borrowed light? Why is it the ray cherished by the initiated yogi? Why is the moon held as the deity of the mind by those yogis? We say, because light, or rather all its occult properties, every combination and correlation of it with other forces, mental, psychic, and spiritual, were perfectly known to the old adepts. Perfectly is a big word. Therefore, although in its knowledge of the ultimate constitution of matter, or in the so-called ultimate analysis, as opposed to the proximate in chemistry, occult science may be less well-informed as to the behavior of compound elements in various cases of physical correlations. Still, it is immeasurably higher in its knowledge of the ultimate occult states of matter, and of the true nature of matter, than all of the physicists and chemists of our modern day put together. Now, if we state the truth openly and in full sincerity, namely, that the ancient initiates had a far wider knowledge of physics as a science of nature than our academies of science, all taken together, possess, the statement will be characterized as an impertinence and an absurdity, for physical sciences are considered to have been carried in our age to the apex of perfection. Hence the twittering query, can the occultist meet successfully the 2 points, namely, A, the production of heat by friction, excitation of molecular motions, and B, the conversion of heat into mechanical force, if they hold to the old exploded theory of heat being a substance or a fluid? To answer the question, it must first be observed that the occult sciences do not regard either electricity or any of the forces supposed to be generated by it as matter in any of the states known to physical science. We got plasma a few years later. To put it more clearly, none of these forces, so-called, are either solids, gases, or fluids. If it did not look pedantic, an occultist would even object to electricity being called a fluid, as it is an effect and not a cause, but its noumenon, he would say, is a conscious cause. The same in the case of force and the atom. Let us see what an eminent academician, Butlerov, the chemist, had to say about these two abstractions. What is force? Argues the great man of science. What is it from a strictly scientific standpoint and as warranted by the laws of conservation of energy? Conceptions of force are resumed by our conceptions of this, that, or another mode of motion. Force is thus simply the passage of one state of motion into another state of the same, of electricity into heat and light, of heat into sound or some mechanical function, and so on. That is not untrue. Footnote. On the plane of manifestation and illusory matter it may be so, not that it is nothing more, for it is vastly more. The first time electric fluid was produced by man on Earth, it must have been friction. Hence, as well known, it is heat that produces it by disturbing its Laya state. It is almost certain that it would have been a static discharge, right? Now, I'm of the firm opinion that the tabernacle of the Israelis was a static generator, that the Ark of the Covenant was both a capacitor and a discharge device, for various reasons that we cover in the Bible study in Exodus if you were interested. And so, the first emanation was probably a static charge, right? If you're wearing clothing of two different makeups, say for instance you're wearing linen and you're wearing leather, that will create a static charge. Or if you're wearing linen and flax or cotton or wool, right? These things rubbing together are differentiated and create a static charge. And if you touch something metal like a doorknob, which is the most common example, there's a shock that is produced. That is probably how man first did electricity. Right? Now, we have many different historical evidences that electricity was at least known, if not fully controlled. There are batteries from Egypt that we can reproduce and show that they probably did indeed possess an electrical charge. Now, what they use that for, we don't know, but they did at least create those batteries. So they had some understanding of electricity, even if it is not the understanding that we hold. There is a fallacy that we operate under that says that, well, that was way back in time, so they could not have had a concept of that, and that is stupid. Back to the text. It is the heat that produces it by distributing its Laya state, and electricity... Wait, did we hit that? Yeah. Sorry, I forgot. And electricity exists no more on Earth, per se, than heat or light or any other force. That is true. They are all correlations, as science says. When a given quantity of heat, assisted by a steam engine, is transformed into mechanical work, we speak of steam power or force. When a falling body strikes an obstacle in its way, thereby generating heat and sound, we call it the power of collision. When electricity decomposes water or heats a platinum wire, we speak of the force of the electrical fluid. When the rays of the sun are intercepted by the thermometer bulb and its quicksilver expands, we speak of the calorific energy of the sun. In short, when one state of a determined quantity of motion ceases, another state of motion equivalent to the preceding takes its place, and the result of such a transformation or correlation is force. In all cases where such a transformation, or the passage of one state of motion into another, is entirely absent, there is no force as possible. Let us admit for a moment an absolutely homogeneous state of the universe, and our conception of force falls down to naught. Neutral, or zero. Therefore, it becomes evident that the force, which materialism considers as the cause of the diversity that surrounds us, is, in sober reality, only in effect, a result of that diversity. From such point of view, force is not the cause of motion, but the result, while the cause of that force, or forces, is not the substance or matter, but motion itself. Matter, thus, must be laid aside, and with it the basic principle of materialism, which has become unnecessary, as force brought down to a state of motion can give no idea of the substance. If force is the result of motion, then it becomes incomprehensible why then motion should become witness to matter, and not to spirit or to a spiritual essence. True, our reason cannot conceive of a motion minus something moving, and our reason is right. But the nature or essay of the something moving remains to science entirely unknown, and the spiritualist, in such case, has as much right to attribute it to a spirit as a materialist to creative and all potential matter. A materialist has no special privileges in this instance, nor can he claim any. The law of conservation of energy, as thus seen, is shown to be illegitimate in its pretensions and claims in this case. The great dogma, no force without matter and no matter without force, falls to the ground. No, and loses entirely the solemn significance with which materialism has tried to invest it. The conception of force still gives no idea of matter and compels us in no way to see in it the origin of all origins. Scientific Letters, Professor Butler. You cannot separate force from motion, right? Even light is matter in motion. It is excited to the point of almost termination, right? The speed of light is quantifiable but variable, and it is the elemental state of whatever is being changed into the photon, but the photon holds weight. You can measure light. That's another thing that's a little bit hard for some people because it is so infinitesimally small of a weight. But you cannot separate matter and force. It's just not going to happen. And again, that is speculation, right? I don't hold any degrees, but I am fairly sure of that one. All right. We are assured that real science is non-materialistic, and that our own conviction tells us that it cannot be so when its learning is real. There is a good reason for it, well defined by some physicists and chemists themselves. Natural sciences cannot go hand in hand with materialism. To be at the height of their calling, men of science have to reject the very possibility of materialistic doctrines having aught to do with the atomic theory, and we find that Lang, Butler-Roth, de Bois-Reymond, the latter probably unconsciously, and several others have proved it. And it is, furthermore, demonstrated by the fact that Canada in India, and Leucippus, Democritus, and after them Epicurus, the earliest atomists in Europe, while propagating their doctrine of definite proportions, believed in gods or supersensuous entities at the same time. Their ideas upon matter thus differed from those now prevalent. We must be allowed to make our statement clearer in a short synopsis of the ancient and modern views of philosophy upon atoms, and thus prove that the atomic theory kills materialism. From the standpoint of materialism, which reduces the beginnings of all to matter, the universe consists, in its fullness, of atoms and vacuity. Even leaving aside the axiom, now absolutely demonstrated by telescope and microscope, taught by the ancients, that nature abhors vacuum. What is an atom? It is, we are answered by science, writes Professor Butler-Roth, the limited division of substance, the indivisible particle of matter. To admit the divisibility of the atom amounts to an admission of an infinite divisibility of substance, which is equivalent to reducing substance to nihil, a nothingness. Owing to a feeling of self-preservation alone, materialism cannot admit infinite divisibility. Otherwise, it would have to bid farewell forever to its basic principle, and thus sign its own death warrant. Wagner, for instance, like a true dogmatist in materialism, declares that to accept infinite divisibility is absurd and amounts to doubting the very existence of matter. The atom is indivisible then, saith materialism. Very well. Okay. Once again, we had the lens of history, and we have divided the atom, but we didn't do it with helium, right? There is a reason we used the one that we did, is because it was thick, right? Uranium is a rather thick element. It has a lot of substance to it, and therefore it is divisible. But helium is not going to be divisible, because the atomic weight of helium is what? 1, right? It has 1 proton, 1 neutron, 1 electron. You cannot divide that. You can make it cease to exist, but you cannot divide it. You can separate the electrical pieces, but you cannot separate it into something new. You can with uranium and the other heavy metals. You can with hydrogen, right? You can divide hydrogen into helium through electromagnetism. I'm not sure if we have actually done that experiment yet, so I cannot say for sure, but I am fairly positive it would be just like a nuclear explosion, a severe source of electrical magnetic heat, right? And so I'm not sure if we've done it or not, but I do not doubt at all that it is possible to divide at least helium, right? I doubt you can do, or hydrogen, not helium. I doubt you can do helium because it is one, but you can, other than dissolution, but you can definitely do the other ones. To what degree and what effectiveness and to what point is different, but the process is probably going to be close to the same with more difficulty the smaller you get. See now what a curious contradiction this fundamental principle of the materialist is leading them into, writes Butler-Roth. The atom is indivisible, and at the same time we know it to be elastic. An attempt to deprive it of elasticity is unthinkable. It would amount to an absurdity. Absolutely non-elastic atoms can never exhibit a single one of those numerous phenomena which are attributed to their correlations. Without any elasticity, the atoms could not manifest their energy, and the substance of the materialist would remain weeded of every force. Therefore, if the universe is composed of atoms, then those atoms must be elastic. It is here that we meet with an insuperable obstacle. For what are the conditions requisite for the manifestation of elasticity? An elastic ball, when striking against an obstacle, is flattened and contracts, which it would be impossible for it to do were not that ball to consist of particles, the relative position of which experiences at the time of the blow a temporary change. This may be said of elasticity in general. No elasticity is possible without change with respect to the position of the compound particles of an elastic body. This means that the elastic body is changeful and consists of particles, or in other words, that elasticity can pertain only to those bodies that are divisible, and the atom is elastic. This is sufficient to show how absurd are these simultaneous admissions of non-divisibility and elasticity of the atom. The atom is elastic, ergo the atom is divisible, and must consist of particles, or of subatoms. And these subatoms, they are either non-elastic, and in such cases they represent no dynamic importance, or they are elastic also. And in that case, they, too, are subject to divisibility, and thus ad infinitum. But infinite divisibility of atoms resolves matter into simple centers of force. An example precludes the possibility of conceiving matter as an objective substance. Wrong. That is false dichotomy. This vicious circle is fatal to materialism. No, it's not. It finds itself caught in its own nets, and no issue is possible for it out of the dilemma. If it says that the atom is indivisible, then it will have mechanics asking it the awkward question: how does the universe move in this case, and how do its forces correlate? A world built on absolutely non-elastic atoms is like an engine without steam. It is doomed to internal inertia. Footnote, Scientific Letters, Butler-Roth. Accept the explanations and teachings of occultism, and the blind inertia of physical science being replaced by the intelligent active powers behind the veil of matter, motion, and inertia, becomes subservient to those powers. It is on the doctrine of the elusive nature of matter and the infinite divisibility of the atom that the whole science of occultism is built. It opens limitless horizons to substance informed by the divine breath of its soul in every possible state of tenuity, states still undreamt of by the most spiritually disposed chemist and physicist. The above views were enunciated by an academician, the greatest chemist in Russia and a recognized authority even in Europe, the late Professor Butleroff. True, he was defending the phenomena of the spiritualist, the materializations, so-called, in which he believes, as Professors Zollner and Hare did, and Mr. A. Russell Wallace, Mr. W. Crookes, and many another fellow of the Royal Society do still, whether openly or secretly. But his argument with regards to the nature of the essence that acts behind the physical phenomena of light, heat, electricity, etc., is no less scientific and authoritative for all that, and apply admirably to the case in hand. Science has no right to deny to the occultist their claim to a more profound knowledge of the so-called forces, which, they say, are only the effects of causes generated by powers, substantial, yet supersensuous, and beyond any kind of matter with which they, the scientists, have hitherto become acquainted. The most science can do is to assume the attitude of agnosticism and to maintain it. Then it can say, "Your case is no more proven than is ours, but we confess to knowing nothing in reality, either about force or matter, or that which lies at the bottom of the so-called correlations of forces. Therefore, time alone can prove who is right and who is wrong. Let us wait patiently, and meanwhile show courtesy instead of scoffing at each other." But to do this requires a boundless love of truth and the surrender of that prestige, however false, of infallibility, which the men of science have acquired among the ignorant and flippant, though cultured masses of the profane. To blend the two sciences, the archaic and the modern, requires first of all the abandonment of the actual materialistic lines. It necessitates a kind of religious mysticism, and even the study of old magic, which our academicians will never take up. The necessity is easily explained. Just as in old alchemical works, the real meaning of the substances and elements meant are concealed under the most ridiculous metaphors. So are the physical, psychic, and spiritual natures of the elements, say, of fire, concealed in the Vedas, and especially in the Puranas, under allegories comprehensible only to the initiates. Had they no meaning, then, indeed, all these long legends and allegories about the sacredness of the 3 types of fire, and the 49 original fires personified by the sons of Daksha's daughters and the rishis, their husbands, who, with the first son of Brahma and his 3 descendants, constitute the 49 fires, would be idiotic verbiage, and no more. But it is not so. Every fire has a distinct function and meaning in the worlds of the physical and the spiritual. It has, moreover, in its essential nature, a corresponding relation to one of the human psychic faculties. Besides its well-determined chemical and physical potencies, when coming in contact with the terrestrially differentiated matter. Science has no speculations to offer upon fire per se. Occultism and ancient religious science have. This is shown even in the meager and purposely veiled phraseology of the Puranas, where, as in the Vayu Purana, many of the qualities of the personified fires are explained. Thus, Pavaka is electric, and Vaidyuta, fire. Pavamana, the fire produced by friction, or Nirmathaya, and Suchi is solar or Sora, fire. Footnote: call the drinkers of waters solar heat causing water to evaporate. All these 3 being the sons of Abhimanin, the Agni, fire, eldest son of Brahma and of Swaha. Pavka, moreover, is made parent to Kavyavhana, the fire of the Pitris. Suchi to Havyavana, the fire of the gods, and Pavamana to Saharaksha, the fire of the Asuras. Now, All this shows that the writers of the Puranas were perfectly conversant with the forces of science and their correlations. Moreover, with the various qualities of the latter in their bearing upon those psychic and physical phenomena which receive no credit and are unknown to physical science now. Very naturally, when an Orientalist, especially one with materialistic tendencies, reads that these are only appellations of fire employed in the invocations and rituals, he calls this tantrika superstition and mystification, and he becomes more careful to avoid errors in spelling than to give attention to the secret meaning attached to the personifications, or to seek their explanation in the physical correlation of forces so far as known. So little credit, indeed, is given to the ancient Aryans for knowledge that even such glaring passages as in Book 1, Chapter 2, Vishnu Purana, are left without any notice. Nevertheless, what can this sentence mean? Then, ether, air, light, water, and earth, severally united with the properties of sound and other qualities, existed as distinguishable according to their properties, but possessing many and various energies, and being unconnected, they could not, without combination, create living beings, not having blended with each other. Having combined, they assumed, through mutual association, the character of one mass of entire unity, and directed by spirit, etc. This means, of course, that the writers were perfectly acquainted with correlation, and were well posted about the origin of cosmos from the undiscrete principle, avyak tanagurahina, as applied to Parabrahman and Muli Prakriti conjointly, and not to avyakata, either first cause or matter, as Wilson gives it. And their first differentiation from Laya into the protyle, as Mr. Crookes has suggestively named matter. Wait. The old initiates knew of no miraculous creation, but taught the evolution of atoms on our physical plane. And their first differentiation from Laya into the protyle, as Mr. Crookes has suggestively named matter, or primordial substance beyond the zero line. There, where we place Mula Prakriti, the root principle of the world stuff and of all in the world. This can be easily demonstrated. Take, for instance, the newly published Catechism of the Vishishtadvaita Vedantins, an orthodox and exoteric system, yet fully enunciated and taught in the 11th century. Its founder, Ramanujakarya, being born in AD 1017, at a time when European science still believed in the squareness and flatness of the earth, of Cosmo Indio Copolitustes of the 6th century. It teaches that before evolution began, Prakriti, nature, was in a condition of laya, or absolute homogeneity, as matter exists in two conditions, the sukshma, or latent and undifferentiated, and the satula, or differentiated condition. Then it became a new, atomic. It teaches of Sura Sattva. A substance is not subject to the qualities of matter from which it is quite different. And adds that, out of that substance, the bodies of the inhabitants of Vaikuntaloka, the heaven of Vishnu, the gods are formed. That every particle or atom of Prakriti contains Jiva, divine life, and is the sarira, body, of that Jiva which it contains, while every Jiva is in its turn the sarira of the Supreme Spirit, as Parabrahm pervades every Jiva as well as every particle of matter. Dualistic and anthropomorphic as may be the philosophy of the Vishishtadvaita, when compared with that of the Advaita, the non-dualist, it is yet supremely higher in the logic and philosophy than the cosmogony accepted by either Christianity or its great opponent, modern science. The followers of one of the greatest minds that ever appeared on earth, the Advaita Vedantins, are called atheists because they regard all save Parabrahm, the secondless or absolute reality, as an illusion. Yet the wisest initiates came from their ranks, as also the greatest yogis. The Upanishads show that they are most assuredly knew not only what is the causal substance in the effects of friction, and that their forefathers were acquainted with the conversion of heat into mechanical force, but that they were acquainted with the noumena of every spiritual as well as of every cosmic phenomena. Truly, the young Brahmin who graduates in universities and colleges of India with the highest honors, who starts in life as an MA or an LLB, with a tail initialed from Alpha to Omega after his name, and a contempt for his national gods proportioned to the honors received in his education in physical sciences. Truly, he has but to read in the light of the latter, and with an eye to the correlation of physical forces, certain passages in his Puranas. If he would learn how much more his ancestors knew than he will ever know, unless he becomes an occultist. Let him turn to the allegory of Pururavas and the celestial Gandharva. Footnote. The Gandharva of the Veda is the deity who knows and reveals the secrets of heaven and divine truth to mortals. Cosmically, the Gandharvas are the aggregate powers of the solar fire and constitute its forces. Cyclically, the intelligence residing in the Sushumna, the solar ray, the highest of the seven rays. Mystically, the occult force in the Soma, the moon, or lunar plant, and the drink made of it. Physically, the phenomenal, and spiritually, the nominal causes of sound and the voice of nature. Hence, they are called the 6,333 heavenly singas, and the musicians of Indra's Loka, who personify, even in number, the various and manifold sounds in nature, both above and below. In the later allegories, they are said to have mystic power over women, and to be fond of them. The esoteric meaning is plain. They are one of the forms, if not the prototypes, of Enoch's angels, the sons of God, who saw that the daughters of men were fair, who married them and taught the daughters of earth the secrets of heaven. And the celestial Gandharva, who furnished the former with a vessel full of heavenly fire. The primeval mode of obtaining fire by friction has its scientific explanation in the Vedas, and is pregnant with meaning for him who reads between the lines. The Tritagni, sacred triad of fires, obtained by the attrition of sticks made of the wood of the Aswatha tree, the bow tree of wisdom and knowledge. Sticks, as many finger breadths long as they are syllables in the Gayatri, must have a secret meaning, or else the writers of the Vedas and Puranas were no sacred writers, but mystificators. That it has such a meaning, the Hindu occultists are a proof, and they alone are able to enlighten science as to why and how the fire that was primarily one was made threefold in our present Manvantara by the son of Ila, Vak, the primeval woman after the deluge, the wife and daughter of Vaivasvata Manu. The allegory is suggestive in whatever Purana it may be read and studied. And that is going to bring us to the end of the masks of science. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. There needs to be clear definitions between speculation and known things, right? We know the makeup of an atom, but back then they were speculating. We know now that force, heat, light, all of those things are directly related to each other, if not exactly the same thing. And so it is important to maintain speculation where it is speculation, right? There are several things, like a lot of things, that we have gone through in this study that I speculate upon. Hopefully, I have been clear in keeping that clear, right? I do believe that my speculations, if I am relaying them, are firmly rooted in enough truth that they will probably be proven to be correct later. But it is entirely possible that I am completely off base, and that is why I maintain that importance on speculation. But other than that, I don't have a whole lot more to add here. So if you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said here. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.